My name is Ricardo Gonzalez and I will be presenting question 1. The question states that in the past couple of years, consumers in South America, Russia, and China have developed a taste for beer and demands for hops has risen. Then in 2006, the biggest hop producer, Germany, had an extremely dry year. The statement made in this question is a positive statement, which is an objective statement that can be verified in fact. It is implicit that any conclusion drawn from a positive statement can be verified and therefore the validity of the conclusion can be tested. The question is clearly linked to the sequential shifts in both supply and demand curves, and the role of price as a market clearing mechanism. But before we go into this, we must understand some of the key assumptions required to substantiate the use of a supply and demand curve. We must assume that the market is perfectly competitive. We are examining a single market, in this case the hops market. Thus, the product is homogeneous. Hops is the only product sold in the market, and all other hops are identical. We also assume that there are many buyers and sellers, and that individual firms have a negligible impact on the market price. Because of these factors, all participants in the market are price takers. The assumption of perfect competition discussed further allows us to assume that market forces of supply and demand, not individual buyers or sellers, affect price, and therefore the allocation of resources. To complement this, we must also assume that all other factors are held equal, which is the theory of ceteris paribus. This allows us to examine the causal relationship between price and quantity. I believe graph D to be the answer for the following reasons. The newly developed taste for beer in large markets such as South America, Russia, and China will increase demand for beer, which will also increase demand for hops due to hops being an input for beer. This will cause a shift to the right to the demand curve due to taste being a demand shifter. We can see this shift in the demand curve in red, denoted as D2. Because demand has shifted outwards, at any given price point there is increased demand for hops. At the old price of P, which is P1, there is excess demand, and this shortage will induce sellers to raise the price from P to P1. In accordance with the law of supply, supply will increase from Q1 to Q2 due to the price increase. Therefore, the market will clear and form a new equilibrium, represented graphically by the point of intersection of the two blue lines, Q2 and P2, which we will call point F. However, Germany has had an extremely dry year, resulting in decreased crop yields. As decreased crop yields means suppliers are unable to supply at Q2, therefore the supply curve will shift inwards, demonstrated by the new red curve, which we will call S2. Suppliers will now supply less hops at any price given, and Q2 will fall to Q3. At the old price of P3, there is now excess demand for hops, and consumers will attempt to outbid one another in order to allocate the scarce resources, which is hops. Those with the highest willingness to pay will remain in the market as they are unwilling to leave. Therefore, the price will rise from P2 to P3 as there is a movement upwards along the demand curve. Thus, a new equilibrium is formed where the red supply curve intersects the red demand curve. At this point, price will be at P3 and quantity 3. Graph D most accurately reflects this economic logic. Thus, it is our chosen answer. Graph A seems to be incorrect as it demonstrates a starting price of P1. This price, however, is not at the market equilibrium of the black supply and demand curves, but instead is higher. Therefore, suppliers are more willing to produce goods at price P1, and consumers are less willing to buy at price P1. This implies a surplus which is not viable in a market of perfect competition, which clears to form an equilibrium. Therefore, we must rule this out. Graph B indicates a rightward shift in supply in hops, which is not the case as the small crop yields in Germany should be reflected in a leftward shift. Hence, we can rule this out as it is false. Graph C shows a supply curve shifting inwards to reflect a decrease in supply, which is true. However, this is not the first event. We must examine chronologically and examine how an increase in demand affects the model. Therefore, the answer is false.
According to the article, consumers in South America, Russia and China increased their demand for beer, so the demand for hops rose. Suppose that the market automatically clears after this increase in demand and there are no other changes in the market. Which pair of graphs best represents the short-run impact on profits and output of Australian hop growers? So let's break down this question. What happened? Well, the question states demand increased. What does this mean? Economic theory suggests an increase in income or demand potential for a normal good will cause demand to be larger than supply, also known as a shortage. And the time frame addressed is short term. The short term addresses the industry's time taken before all factors of production become variable, and hence the market supply does not have time to adjust output. Short-term qualities of a perfectly competitive market are there are many buyers and sellers, the goods offered by the sellers are largely the same, and the cost of inputs are constant, so no one has an advantage. These rules mean that buyers and sellers are considered price takers and have no impact on the market price. Therefore, all firms are directly responsive to an exteriorly determined market price. As all firms aim to maximise their profit, firms will produce up until marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, bearing in mind that the price line is the marginal revenue curve because prices are fixed and so total revenue is solely reliant on quantity. At any point where marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, the costs outweigh revenue and the firm will make an economic loss. Alternatively, where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, the firm is not maximising profit because it can still produce units where the price received is greater than the costs incurred. Because the profit of a business is total revenue minus total costs, we can rearrange this equation to say that profit is equal to price minus average total cost times quantity. Therefore, at the point zero profit, or the point of most efficiency for a competitive market, price is equal to average total cost, which is equal to marginal costs. We therefore expect a market in long-term equilibrium to have a price at the point of intersection of marginal cost, or average total cost, shown in the graph as P1. As explored in question 1, an outward shift in demand curve would lead to an increased market price at equilibrium. In the short run, the firms in the market will be receiving a price higher than their costs of production. This is highlighted again by the equation price minus average total cost times quantity, with price being larger than average total costs. This reflects a positive profit for the producers, and the new price will be above the intersection point of marginal cost and average total costs. Although this will give incentive for new firms to enter the market and increase supply, it's not possible in the short term due to the limitations of fixed costs. We therefore would expect our answer to look similar to this estimate. Graph A shows no shifts in the demand curve, but rather an industry entering a shortage, most likely due to some sort of price control. Either way, the price falls and no demand increase is shown, and hence the answer is incorrect. Graph B shows price rising as a result of a decrease in supply shown at point 1, causing a shortage and pushing price up. This is not the short-term effect specified in the question, as supply cannot shift in the short term, and hence, graph B can also be ruled out. Graph C shows an increase in supply forcing the price to fall. This increase is not considered a short-term event, as it would require the variability of all factors of production. The results are also contrary to our analysis of the question, as point 2 shows price falling, and point 3 highlights loss in profits. Graph C is also incorrect. Graph D indicates an increased shift in the demand curve at point 1. At the old price of P, there is an excess demand and the shortage will encourage sellers to raise the price from P to P1, as seen at point 2. Point 3 shows that this increase brings price above the average total cost curve and indicates a positive profit for the businesses involved. The individual hop growers already in the market increase their output to meet this demand at the new short-term equilibrium. This graph is exactly as predicted, and hence we conclude that graph D is the accurate response.
Question 3 follows from the short-run situation described in question 2. Which pair of graphs best represents the long-run impact on profits and output of Australian hop growers? We are to assume that the hops market is a constant cost industry. It is important to identify the assumptions underlying the short run and the long run. In the short run, at least one factor of production is fixed, whereas in the long run, all factors of production are variable. Therefore, there are no constraints that prevent firms from freely exiting and entering the market. Because of this, in the long run, when price is less than average total cost, individual hop growers will not be able to maintain financial solvency and will exit the market to avoid continued economic losses. In the short run, however, firms will supply even when price is less than ATC but greater than AVC in order to offset the loss associated with fixed costs at zero production. This is known as loss minimization. In graph A, the firms are making economic profit equal to the shaded red area and proven in question 2. In the long run, as earlier discussed, firms are able to enter the market. Because there is profit in the market, firms will be incentivized to enter the market. And as marginal hop growers enter the industry, total market supply increases and shifts the supply curve outwards from S1 to S2. At the old price of P2, there is excess supply and the price will fall. It is important to understand why the market price will fall until no more profits can be made. The profit equation can be written as profit equals price minus average total cost multiplied by Q. Remembering that in the long run, firms will exit the market when price is less than ATC. But if price is greater than ATC, then firms will continue to enter the market and due to the increased supply, push the price down. So why will it be the case that no more profits can be made? Let us take ATC equals 7, P equals 6, and Q equals 7 and sub these values into the equation. we see that profit is -7. In other words, the firm is making a loss of 7 and will therefore leave the market. We can therefore deduce that the price or the marginal revenue curve must be tangential to the ATC curve and that firms are producing at the minimum efficient scale point. When no economic profits are made, competitive firms operate at the unique point where marginal revenue equals price equals marginal cost equals average total cost. We are at our long-run equilibrium and the entry and exit process has ended. However, industry output has risen from Q to Q2 because increased suppliers have entered the market, as evidenced from the shift from S1 to S2. Graph B indicates that losses are made, as does Graph C. However, both of these are incorrect, as profits are made in the market. This is proven in question 2. Graph D further indicates that profits are being made in the market. However, it states that the price is higher than what it was before the fall in supply, and therefore the demand for hops falls. However, this is incorrect, as graphically it is represented by a shift inwards in the demand curve. Any change in the price of the good, however, will cause a movement along the demand curve, not shift it. We can therefore deduce that graph D is wrong, and the correct answer is A. Question 4 asks us to consider whether the long-run supply curve is upward sloping, flat, or downward sloping in the hop industry. We must first examine the characteristics of each of these supply curves. An upward sloping long-run supply curve occurs when there are increasing costs as industry output increases. Market price will rise relative to the original long-run equilibrium. In the graph, this is denoted as the difference between PE and P0. We call this an increasing cost industry. A downward sloping curve denotes decreasing costs as output increases in the long run. Intuitively, this will result in a lower market price, as demonstrated from the movement downwards from PE to P0. A constant cost industry will have constant costs as output increases and a steady market price over the long run. This will result in a flat long-run supply curve. In the hops industry, firms are making economic profit equal to the shaded red area. This will induce new firms to enter into the market. How far the supply curve shifts as a result of this, and the related impact on market price, indicates whether the hops market is an increasing, decreasing, or constant cost industry. As more suppliers enter the market, there is more supply at any given price point. We see a shift therefore from S1 to S2, and price will fall from P2 to P3. Profit for hops producers will fall as evidenced by the equation. As price falls, so too will profit. Let us consider land as an input for hops. We know that as suppliers enter the hops market due to economic profits, these firms must have land to grow hops on. We therefore see an increase in demand for land, which causes a shift from D to D1. Price will accordingly rise from P to P1. This occurs because land is a scarce resource. An increase in the price of land will affect the average total cost curve. The industry as a whole will experience higher resource costs, and an increase in the price of inputs will force the average total cost curve to shift upwards from ATC1 to ATC2. Again, this will lower the firm's profits. As more firms continue to enter the market, the average total cost curve will continue to shift upwards as the demand for land and other inputs increases and therefore raises the price of these. These two effects are going to act like a vice. As more suppliers enter the market, the average total cost curve will continue to shift upwards and the marginal revenue curve will continue to shift downwards. We know that in the long run, competitive firms will operate at the unique point where marginal revenue equals price equals marginal cost, which equals average total cost. A long-run equilibrium will therefore occur when the marginal revenue curve is tangent to the average total cost curve. In the hops industry, we know that costs are increasing as industry output increases. This will place an upwards pressure on the market price. However, the increase in supply is a countervailing effect on the market price. Overall, we can see graphically that at our original long-run equilibrium at P1 and Q1, we're at this point. However, after the changes, and at our new long-run equilibrium, producers are producing at Q3 and receive price P3. The line joining these 2 points is upward sloping, and therefore the hops industry has a long-run upward sloping supply curve. Another factor affecting the long-run supply curve is the differing costs of firms. Hop farmers that are more productive will be able to produce the same amount of hops with a smaller amount of inputs, and therefore have lower costs. To induce entrants with higher costs into the market price will have to rise. For example, at a quantity of 80 hops, marginal sellers will have higher costs and therefore a higher willingness to sell than the marginal seller at a quantity of 40 hops. Therefore, at a higher quantity, the market price will need to be higher to induce the marginal seller to enter the market. It is likely that this will apply to the hop industry. Different firms will specialize in growing hops. Other firms will grow hops in different climates that produce higher yields, and other firms will face different regulatory costs to grow hops. Therefore, these conflicting factors will result in different firms having different costs, and therefore an upward sloping supply curve.